Good morning, everybody. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to the Hurricane Hub discussion for Monday, June 19th, 2023. Happy Juneteenth for those that celebrate. And we are starting off today with a very, you know, unusual, active, and unusual sort of discussion, especially for the date that it is today, June 19th, 2023, for multiple reasons. One, of course, as you can tell by the title, we indeed have a new tropical depression as well as a new invest today. And also, new forecasts have been released within the last few days from multiple agencies across the hurricane tracking world, and we're going to go over one of them, of course, by the infamous University of Arizona, which released their forecast actually a few days ago, but I guess is especially receiving talk today, at least from what I've seen. And then, of course, we're going to go over stuff related to Tropical Depression 3 because it actually could be a lot more of a dicier situation than you think, and we'll review why in just a second. But overall, of course, generally talking about the NHC homepage, Tropical Depression 3, just designated as of a few minutes ago, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So this is roughly 20 minutes or so from when they designated this. 35 miles an hour and 1,009 millibars. And of course, the more unusual situation is where like, look at where this is, all the way out in the central NDR, and of course, the date is June 19th, and we have another area of interest. This is actually Invest 93L, which has also been designated as of an hour or so ago, all the way out in the Eastern Atlantic as well. And this also has potential to go on and develop and maybe become another disturbance to watch potentially for development. But Tropical Depression 3 is especially of concern because it might also involve impacts to the islands, and not just as a weak tropical system, but we'll go over in just a little bit. But really quickly, Invest 93L, this is what it is right here. Chance of development in the next 48 hours, low right now, but medium chance over the next 7 days. And I'll show you in the models, most of them indeed actually do expect this to form. And then really quickly, Eastern Pacific, quite surprised at this point that we're still seeing such little amounts of activity in the Eastern Pacific. This is Invest 90E in the Eastern Pacific with a 0% chance of formation. Any further formation, things are just not very favorable with this. So we're not expecting development in the Eastern Pacific anytime soon. But really quickly, a look at Tropical Depression number 3, if the satellite thing will load. Taking a little time. I don't know why. Let me really quickly refresh, and then no images. Because I think they actually updated. Yeah, see, they updated to Tropical Depression 3. Let's see, will it load now? Yes, there we go. Tropical Depression 3, the latest satellite image. Curved band, as you can see, this is something that a lot of people have been talking about, a curved band developing. And you can also see that that a lot of people like to look for this shrimp type of look, where we have this curved, C shape, and a kind of like a band that spirals inward towards the center, which is right around here. It definitely has that look. And if we take a look at satellite as well, let me bring up the visible satellite, the visible shortwave. You could see that the rotation, it's there. So this is definitely some sort of tropical system. You could also see inflow coming in from the south, and then also from the north as well. And then we have a bunch of these fanning clouds on the upper levels, which represents outflow. So this is also ventilating as well. This is breathing, which is also very necessary for a developing tropical system. So this is doing well, and definitely no reason to believe that this is not some sort of tropical system right now. Rightfully so. Then it's been designated with 93 with Tropical Depression 3. And I'm just going to put into perspective where this is, as well as the combination of 93L. You can see where this is all the way out in the central Atlantic, and then this is 93L right out here, and then there's another tropical wave coming off the coast of Africa. And this is just absolutely unusual that we're seeing this activity. It really is. Climatology, we don't expect on average anything like this to occur, let alone multiple areas of interest to watch, especially with 93L and Tropical Depression 3 occurring at the same time. And especially for June 19th, it's unusual, but I'll go over later, obviously. This is not too unexpected, and I did already talk about this a little bit before. We have very warm sea surface temperature anomalies, very favorable conditions, as well as the lack of a lot of Saharan air, which is why a lot of these disturbances are really able to get going, which is why we have Tropical Depression 3. And not only is things are favorable for this to potentially, develop, and as we've seen it has developed, but this could also strengthen too the NHC cone, and this is why they've also mentioned interest in the islands should watch, because in the longer range, extended range forecast, the NHC is expecting, as well as most, if not all, of the global models think that this could potentially reach hurricane intensity. Even more weirder, honestly. We don't, if you're really tracking, and I really have to kind of emphasize, if you're tracking for the first time this season, we really don't get anything like this at all. Hurricane potentially by the time this already reaches the central western MDR around 55 west in mid-June, almost late June. We don't even see development in this part of the basin out towards the eastern Atlantic over here. We don't worry at all, on average at all, till mid-August. So this is already 2 months ahead of the climatology, the statistics of climatology that we typically see in the Atlantic. This is already well ahead of that. And then especially the fact that this is during an El Nino, you gotta question, what could that mean for activity later on? I'll talk about that again in just a little bit, but once again, talking about what our depression is expected to do. Could become a hurricane before it enters the islands, and I think the NHC is expecting a peak of 80 miles an hour, 70 knots, and that is a pretty decent storm, especially for this time of year. So this could be a hurricane that you need to watch for the islands, and then this also enters the Eastern Caribbean as well. But of course, this is far out. We're getting towards the 4 or 5 day time period, so it's not specifically the Central Islands I need to watch. Look at the cone of uncertainty. It stretches for the entire Lesser Antilles and Antilles Island chain, all the way from basically the southern islands, excluding of course Trinidad and Tobago. It goes all the way from the Lesser Antilles all the way to the Greater Antilles, including even the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands as well. So anywhere along this island chain, everybody in the islands needs to have their eyes out on the tropics, especially if this might be an incoming hurricane expected. And NHC has their key messages. This is something that you'll be seeing most often, especially with these impact storms throughout the season. You'll have key messages that the NHC releases, and it mentions the depression is forecast to strengthen and move across the Lesser Antilles as a hurricane on Thursday and Friday. And of course comes the usual, but honestly not as talked about, risks as they should be. Risk of flooding from heavy rain, hurricane force winds, and dangerous storm surge, which is also something we're watching with this, especially since it could be a hurricane on approach. And of course the waves that come with this as well. And then given the large uncertainty of the forecast, the larger than usual uncertainty that they also mentioned, it is too early to specify the location and magnitude of where these hazards could occur. However, as I just mentioned right now, everyone in the Lesser Antilles, including Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, should closely monitor updates and have their forecast plan, their hurricane plan in place, which is something that we need to watch. Always watch in advance of time, especially there's a lot of uncertainty. Some models think that this could maybe come close to the islands and maybe go out to sea and not directly impact the islands, and then there's some other models that take this in straight through the Lesser Antilles and into the Caribbean. There's still a lot of uncertainty right now, and because of that, everybody in the islands should be watching. But really quickly, before we get any further, we should mention 93L, and this could also be a decent system as well. Most global models, including the hurricane models actually, which I've also found very interesting too, even the hurricane models develop this into a potential system. And of course it is disorganized right now, Of course, hence why the NHC does not have a very high chance of this forming within the next 48 hours or even 7 days yet. But I did find this very interesting that the intensity guidance of 93L, of course, this is from Tropical Tidbits. I found it interesting how most of the intensity guidance is actually, or the intensity guidance that we have right now, most of it is actually on the higher end of the scale for tropical storm, and even some of them bring this as well into hurricane intensity for 93L. Kind of be interesting and kind of cool, honestly, if we have two hurricanes in June. It would also be quite remarkable and something very something I will definitely remember for the next few years, because not at all do we tend to see tropical systems that develop and become hurricanes in the MDR in June. That is something not very usual at all. But as I mentioned before, it honestly shouldn't come as a surprise, especially with the conditions that we have right now. I mean, just look at this, 26 degrees Celsius stretching all the way from, and this is the actual sea surface temperatures that are being recorded on the surface right now, on the surface of the ocean, all the way from the islands, which by the islands, by the way, has anomalies up to 29 degrees Celsius. So you would especially wonder how things might be favorable enough for maybe a hurricane to come out of at least one of these systems, especially Tropical Depression 3. And really quickly on that, I think it's located somewhere in here right now. The entire stretch of the MDR that Tropical Depression 3 is gonna kind of move over, there's very warm sea surface temperatures, more than enough, especially considering, number one, June. It's mid-June. It's June 19th, and number two, the threshold for development that we typically look for is 26 degrees Celsius. That is usually the threshold that we look for in terms of favorable sea surface temperatures for development, and especially as this gets closer towards the islands, they get towards 28, 29, which is more than enough. And even for Invest 93L, which is out here in the more eastern Atlantic, we have 26 degrees Celsius stretching to there as well, and even decently into the northern MDR as well. This is roughly 15 north. I think this is roughly around 15 north, and most, if not all, of the MDR up to 15 north has 26 degrees Celsius being read on the map, and much especially reflective when you look at the sea surface temperature anomalies. This is the actual sea surface temperatures on the surface, and this map is the departures from normal. And man, it just keeps on getting more impressive. This complete horseshoe backward C-shaped signature stretching all the way from Greenland and off the coast of Greenland and the northern Atlantic, where the anomalies there have especially been warming up in the last few weeks or so, as much as 2, 3, even 4 degrees Celsius in some parts, stretching all the way from the northern Atlantic right near Iceland all the way down through the Canary Current off the Iberian Peninsula and into the MDR. Something we call a classic positive AMO, meaning Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, basically a measurement of how warm the Atlantic is. And the warmer it is, especially in a positive AMO like we have this year, in this case a very strong positive AMO, that just represents the Atlantic is very warm, very prime for development, and also sea surface temperature anomaly pattern that we would typically look for in an indicator for a very, very active hurricane season. And which is why I guess that may be some of the reasons, especially for a developing El Nino, which we're expecting out here, which on top of that, I mentioned this over the last few weeks and honestly since the beginning of the year, very interesting that we also have this portion of colder anomalies typically associated with a more colder northern Pacific look, and not very much in line with what we typically have in El Nino. Usually in El Nino this helps warm up the entire northern Pacific as well, not this year. And you just gotta wonder, because sometimes, especially when we have this colder look off the Pacific coast, it's typically known for helping reduce convection in the eastern Pacific, which in turn, despite the fact we have an El Nino this year, does also help with reducing shear in the Atlantic, especially when you combine the fact that we have a ridiculously, incredibly warm Atlantic this year. So you would think that when you put all these factors together, it would kind of set the stage or set the idea for maybe a very active hurricane season. And University of Arizona has come out and said that with a honestly incredible prediction that they've made, incredible in terms of how active they're expecting it. This is actually as of June 16th, and I'm actually quite surprised that I did not catch that they made this forecast till today. Don't know how, but here we are. But at least I know this forecast now, because this is the University of Arizona. They released their forecast, of course, recently, and if you remember their April prediction, they thought 19 named storms, 9 hurricanes, and 5 major hurricanes, and everybody was like, I would say at least judgmental. Let's put it like that. Everybody was very judgmental of their forecasts from April, but here we are. They're 2023, their June prediction, and now they've gone to 25 named storms, 12 hurricanes, and 6 major hurricanes with an ACE index of 260. That is incredible. And honestly, I wouldn't be too quick to judge either, because given all the factors we're looking at, look at that colder Pacific, which would tend to also help concentrate more energy in the Atlantic, despite the fact we have an El Nino. But honestly, something that I've noticed people have been talking about as well is look at how this colder tongue does honestly try to extend closer towards the equator, and maybe could that have an impact on maybe kind of suppressing development of this El Nino to an extent that the Atlantic could maybe use that as an advantage to take over. Well, it seems like maybe that's what the University of Arizona is thinking, and given all the activity we're having now, should it really be something that we completely throw away, especially since we're having the potential for 2 June MDR storms to occur. We already have one occurring now, and maybe a second one on hand with 93L. Should we really be too quick to judge and throw this away? Honestly, I don't think so. It's definitely incredible, because as well, 260 ACE, which, if you don't know what ACE means, it's called accumulated cyclone energy. Basically, in short, the energy that is calculated from the duration and also intensity of these storms. So tropical storm, hurricane, the energy that is calculated specifically by Colorado State University. They came up with this scale. They come up with this scale to kind of measure the energy that is output by these systems, and that also helps as a statistical look to measure how intense a season is. And 260, that would actually beat the highest, I think by 1 point, but still that would beat the highest recorded ACE on record of a season in the Atlantic. I think the record is 259, and it was set back all the way back by 1933. I remember that. And they had a record of 259 ACE. 2005 had a record of 250, so 9 points behind the official record. This would beat the record by 1. So if that happens, that would be quite incredible. But also, honestly, what I think might be the most important part of the discussion today is what the models forecast, because that would be the most important, especially into looking into what could the impacts be, especially for those in the islands. And we'll start off with the GFS. This is the 6E run by the GFS, and let's just move it up in time. And you see, as I did mention before, that also does begin to develop this 93L that's all the way out here, and then this is Tropical Depression 3. And let's move it out in time. This is by hour 60. Already a bona fide signature. Would probably guess that this is a hurricane already on the GFS, and even this too might be already a decent tropical storm. And then as we move this out into time, this is hour 90, and then this is by hour 120. And even notoriously, since the GFS is forecasting a very strong storm to come out of this, probably the GFS is on the higher end of the scale for the forecast when it comes to Tropical Depression 3, at least. And they even have a bona fide signature for 93L, which is out here as well. So maybe this could be something else that we watch for as well. But even then, let me see if I could actually do this. Could I go back in the model runs and see? And something else, I'll show the GFS. And something else that you notice as well is kind of notice how the GFS has kind of been trending westward as well. Even the GFS, which has been showing a notoriously kind of strong signature. Oh, I kind of did something over here. Notice how the come on, they took that away, but I'm gonna bring it back. But notice what I've been trying to say. Notice how even the GFS, even though they have a very bona fide, that looks like a very strong, a very decent storm on the model, notice how even then they're trending closer towards the islands. And as I did just show you, let's take a look at previous runs. And this is also kind of a really good way to take a look at the trend and notice really that the GFS indeed has been trending closer towards the islands. So you would think that could be something very interesting that we need to watch. Maybe the GFS with showing a stronger storm. It does still, of course, because of that, kind of turn this very close to the islands, but then out to sea. And then after that, and then hint to the GFS going out to 7 days. This is hour 160. GFS and I think other models too try to develop something else that comes off the coast and we're still in June 26th, and if that happens, that would be incredible. But even the GFS, bottom line that I'm trying to say, even the GFS kind of brings us closer towards the islands in comparison to the last several runs. And then this is the 0Z run. This is the 6Z run from the Euro. That's not finished loading, but let me bring the 0Z, since that's the one that's fully loaded on the Euro. And then you see that Euro actually brings us into the islands 96 hours. It does show it weaker, and then it kind of dissolves the storm as by the time it gets into the Caribbean, although not all the models agree with that. GFS and other models kind of are on the higher side, so maybe that's the Euro. But the Euro brings us into the islands. And then remember this, the H-Wharf has the storm. Clearly they don't have it right now, but they had it earlier. The H-Wharf had Invest 92L, but if I remember correctly, the H-Wharf also brought this storm into the islands as well. So the trend is definitely that the islands need to watch for potential impacts. And actually, why not? Let's bring out some other models too. The CMC. Let me bring this to the 0Z run and see what the CMC shows. The CMC as well also shows this impacting the islands and potentially being a concern for them. And most of the model intensity guidance is in agreement that this could possibly be a hurricane, or at least a strong, decent tropical storm by the time it gets there, which especially for this time of year, June, that is something that needs to be taken into consideration very much so, and something that people definitely need to be watching very closely. So we'll see what happens with this. Definitely those in the islands need to watch, and if this does indeed become a June hurricane, that would be very incredible. But as I did mention before, and I kind of gave you a little hint just several seconds ago with the longer range GFS, Eric Webb did mention, but don't look now. This is something that he tweeted before, so he mentions Invest 92L. Keep in mind that is now Tropical Depression 3, but he mentions don't look now. But as if Invest 92L and the wave behind it weren't enough, there are a legitimate number of EPS European ensembles and a few GEFS ensemble members trying to develop yet another tropical wave over the eastern Atlantic in several days, given the less favorable climatology favored portion of the Atlantic these waves are trying to develop in. This is a pretty definitive sign that despite being in an El Nino, and something I find also incredible as well, is that all of this is happening in an El Nino. You got to take that into consideration as well, or a supposed El Nino. The tropical Atlantic is unusually favorable for development this season, and we're probably headed for a fairly active season overall. So you just gotta wonder, even if people like Eric Webb, which Eric Webb is a government meteorologist, he even has it on his blog, in his description on his page. He's a government meteorologist, and he also has university. He also has a background in studying at university. And some people like him are saying that we could have an active season despite there being an El Nino, and obviously this should all be a sign. Two MDR developing systems in June. You really gotta wonder if this season is really on track to being active. And in the case, if you want to believe University of Arizona, which in my opinion we should definitely be giving them more credit, could this really be a season that we're heading towards, where it could be a very active and maybe historical season on cards? We'll have to see, but generally a lot of things, starting to develop, especially shorter time where we're actually now looking at potentially a hurricane threat for land. And of course with that, might start to post more frequently, as in multiple times a day. Definitely going to try to post for the next few days, every single day, this entire week, so expect a lot more of me. If this does get designated Brett today, I will most definitely, probably 100% chance I will post later today. If not, we'll try to do another discussion later today, going over more closely potential impacts to the islands that this could have. And of course we'll have a video tomorrow out as well, in the morning and probably in the afternoon as well. And also might also as well do a live stream sometime later this week, going over impacts more real time, instead of having a video out that doesn't post till 20 minutes after I'm done recording. Better to do it all in real time. So we'll probably do that later this week, and maybe even multiple as well. I'm going to have my usual friends on as well. But overall, a lot to go over, a lot to watch, both short and long term. And this could be, once again, as I did mention before, this could be a very interesting journey we're heading on, not only throughout the season, but specifically over the next week or so. We'll have to watch. But I'm going to get this online, going to get this out to everybody, and I hope you all see it. Hope you all, especially if you're in the islands, take this seriously. Watch very closely. This could be a potential incoming hurricane threat, so watch and keep your eyes out on the tropics. And if you're not yet ready, especially those in Puerto Rico that have been getting lashed over the last several years, especially since 2017, and then again last year they got it pretty bad. You guys got it pretty bad with Fiona. Get your hurricane plan ready. Get your first aid kit. Get everything you need to know, everything you need. Your flashlight, preparations for evacuation if you can. Get everything ready, because we might have a system on its way over to you. But of course, exact location we'll have to see over the next few days. But that's especially why you should be preparing now instead of later, especially to release any sort of stress. Because always, being ahead of these systems, always being ahead of the storm, watching the forecast is honestly, especially when it comes to preparedness, is the most key thing. And that's why especially a lot of these deaths and a lot of these damages occur, is people don't prepare well enough. They are not well enough aware of the potential hazards that are going to affect them. And honestly, in many ways, we could really say that a bunch of deaths, especially that we see from these storms, are preventable. It really just comes from preparedness, which is something very key that will be needed, especially over the next few days in the islands. So if you're there, prepare and keep an eye on the tropics. That's the best thing that I could especially tell you right now, especially since it's still a little far out till we know exactly where this will be going. But anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up for today's video, or for the video for now. Might do another one today, we'll see. But stay safe, everybody. Watch the tropics, especially now. And if you're new, subscribe. I'll be posting, once again, you'll probably be seeing a lot more of me over the next week or so, especially with this threat that we're seeing. And stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to all. Subscribe, and we will talk again probably very soon.